A groundbreaking genetic discovery about John F. Kennedy's maternal line reveals a truth far more extraordinary than any myth, challenging everything we thought we knew about American power. The Kennedy family crafted their identity around a singular origin story: Irish Catholic immigrants fleeing famine, arriving in Boston with nothing. This narrative became the bedrock of JFK's political brand. Yet, a genetic genealogist stared at her screen, silent, as the results loaded. She had analyzed thousands of mitochondrial samples from royal lines, presidential families, and ancient dynasties, recognizing instantly what rare or hidden ancestry looked like. But this was profoundly different. The maternal lineage of John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, the most powerful man on Earth, had just returned as one of the most common genetic profiles in the entire Western world. No concealed royalty, no unique variant, no secret bloodline etched into the code, just an unassuming, ordinary haplogroup, shared by millions of famine survivors who crossed the Atlantic with nothing. She studied it for a long time, grappling with the profound question: if this DNA was so ordinary, how on earth did it lead to the Oval Office? This was the family no one truly knew. Before delving into this astonishing result, you must first understand the pervasive assumptions about the Kennedy family, for those assumptions are integral to the story itself. John Fitzgerald Kennedy remains one of the most mythologized figures in American history. The 35th president, the youngest man ever elected to that office, a Harvard graduate, a decorated war hero, and the son of a multi-millionaire ambassador who served as the U.S. envoy to the United Kingdom. The image of the Kennedys is immediate: power, wealth, prestige, a dynasty. They represent an American aristocracy so deeply woven into the national imagination that its origins are rarely questioned. People envision generations of privilege, old money, perhaps even a trace of European nobility in their bloodline, quietly confirming the grandeur the Kennedy image always suggested. This unquestioned assumption, however, is precisely the problem. Because when you trace the maternal line, not the money, not the politics, not the public image, but the actual biological maternal line running through JFK's mother, Rose Elizabeth Fitzgerald Kennedy, you uncover something entirely unexpected, something no mythology could have prepared you for. The maternal line is unique in that science can trace it with absolute precision. It remains unblurred, unmixed, and undiluted by marriage or the passage of time. And what science discovered when it traced this line is the very core of this narrative. Rose Elizabeth Fitzgerald Kennedy, born in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1890, was the daughter of John F. Fitzgerald, famously known as Honey Fitz. He was the legendary Boston mayor and congressman who intrinsically understood how to transform raw community loyalty into political capital. Honey Fitz was a truly gregarious character, a quality he possessed in boundless measure, which proved immensely advantageous throughout his successful career as an alderman, state senator, and U.S. congressman. Rose herself was cultured, devout, educated in Europe, and keenly aware of her family's ascending social status. She married Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., and together they had 9 children. She lived to be 104 years old. Crucially, Rose was also the carrier of a mitochondrial DNA line that passed completely unchanged from her cells through her mother, her mother's mother, and so on, back to a place and time utterly removed from the opulence of the Kennedy compound at Hyannis Port. This unbroken lineage is what the history books often overlook, a scientific truth that cannot be denied. Most people are unaware of a fundamental aspect of mitochondrial DNA. It does not mix or blend. Unlike the rest of your genetic code, it isn't reshuffled every generation. Mitochondrial DNA passes from mother to child, entirely intact, almost completely unchanged, indefinitely. Within nearly every cell in your body are structures called mitochondria, the energy factories that convert food into fuel. While the DNA in your cell nucleus is a 50/50 blend of your mother's and father's genetic material, the mitochondrial DNA in your cells comes exclusively from your mother. When an egg is fertilized, the sperm's mitochondria are destroyed. Only the mothers survive, passing intact to every child she bears. This isn't a fringe theory. It's a foundational concept in every biology textbook. This unique inheritance pattern makes mitochondrial DNA the gold standard for tracing maternal ancestry. Mutations are extraordinarily rare, accumulating so slowly that scientists use them to measure time across thousands of years. This means the mitochondrial DNA you carry today is virtually identical to your mother's, which was identical to her mother's, tracing back unchanged through every woman in your direct maternal line across centuries. It cannot be faked, misremembered, or polished by a public relations team. Scientists classify mitochondrial DNA into haplogroups, which are clusters of people sharing a common maternal ancestor, typically tens of thousands of years ago. These haplogroups reveal, with remarkable precision, where your ancient maternal ancestors originated and what populations they belonged to. This advanced genetic science allows us to pinpoint specific haplogroups at a moment in time and identify shared mutations with ancient individuals, reconstructing ancestral paths. So, when genetic genealogists apply this science to a famous maternal line, the resulting haplogroup can either confirm or entirely overturn everything the historical records seem to suggest. The critical question then becomes, what haplogroup does JFK's maternal line belong to? The answer is something nobody anticipated. The mitochondrial haplogroup running through JFK's maternal line is consistent with haplogroups H and U, the dominant lineages found in the Irish and broader Western European population. These are neither rare nor exotic. They are not the signature of ancient royalty or hidden nobility. They are, in fact, the most common haplogroups in Western Europe, shared by tens of millions of people. There exists no verified scientific study, no peer-reviewed publication, no credible geneticist anywhere who has identified a rare or anomalous mitochondrial variant in JFK's maternal line. No hidden non-European ancestry, no unusual mutation, no genetic mystery concealed beneath the surface of the Kennedy story. The DNA unequivocally states, Irish, Western European, common, unremarkable. Specifically, the haplogroup was H, shared by tens of millions across the island of Ireland and throughout its diaspora, scattered worldwide. It is the same quiet code carried by the descendants of farmers, laborers, and famine immigrants, people who crossed the Atlantic in conditions that defy imagination. It is the most ordinary genetic result one could possibly obtain. But here's what nobody discusses. That very ordinariness, that complete scientific and measurable unremarkability, is the most extraordinary thing about this entire story. Because that exact mitochondrial haplogroup, in that exact maternal line, passed through women who arrived in America with absolutely nothing. Women who entered a city where shop windows openly displayed signs reading, "No Irish need apply." Women who were systematically described by the Anglo-Protestant establishment as racially inferior, politically powerless, and socially invisible. Yet, a century later, that same unbroken maternal line, haplogroup H, common, unremarkable, produced the President of the United States. This profound paradox is what makes researchers pause. It's not just that the DNA is ordinary. It's what that DNA had carried, what it had survived. To truly grasp the meaning of this result, we must understand the origins of this line, which means venturing to Ireland during the darkest decade of the 19th century. This line was born into Ngorta Mór, the Great Famine. The Great Famine, or Ngorta Mór in Irish, devastated Ireland between 1,845 and 1,852. A potato blight, Phytophthora infestans, annihilated the primary food source for the rural poor in a country where 1/3 of the population depended almost entirely on potatoes for survival. The consequences were unprecedented in Europe for a century. Approximately 1 million people perished from starvation and related diseases, and another million or more emigrated in the immediate famine years alone. By the end of the 19th century, Ireland's population had plummeted from its pre-famine peak, and the exodus continued for generations. Those who fled were not the wealthy. They were tenant farmers, laborers, people systematically dispossessed under centuries of colonial land policy. They owned nothing, controlled nothing, and had no protection when the crops failed. Many arrived in American port cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. As the British economy slid into recession, the government controversially decided that any famine relief for Ireland had to be paid for solely through taxes raised within Ireland. After surviving what historians call coffin ships, overcrowded, disease-ridden vessels where mortality rates during the crossing were often catastrophic, JFK's maternal ancestors were among these desperate people. Genealogical records trace Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy's maternal line to County Limerick, with Fitzgerald roots reaching into County Wexford and the wider province of Munster. These were working-class Catholic families from the famine era, arriving in Boston with almost nothing, at a time when Boston vehemently did not want them. Thomas H. O'Connor, a historian who dedicated his career to documenting Boston's Irish community, wrote that these immigrants landed at the absolute bottom of the city's social hierarchy. They were crammed into tenements in the North End and East Boston, forced to take the most dangerous and lowest-paid work available, and subjected to open, systematic discrimination considered entirely acceptable by the Protestant Anglo-American establishment that governed the city. The economic, ideological, political, and religious failures of Britain's leaders ensured that the Great Famine became the great rupture in Irish history, and subsequently in the history of the Union. O'Connor wasn't merely describing a footnote in Boston's past. He was detailing the crucible that forged America's most powerful political family. He once reflected that the transformation this community underwent in a single century was, by any measure, one of the most dramatic social reversals in the history of modern democracy. He was not exaggerating. So, now you understand what the DNA was carrying and what it had endured. The question then becomes, how does a lineage that began there, amidst famine, on coffin ships, in a city with no Irish need apply signs in its windows, end up where it did? The answer involves a woman most people have never heard of, and a man who understood power in a way almost no one in his era did. Allow me to introduce Mary Josephine Hannon, Rose Kennedy's mother, the woman through whom the maternal mitochondrial line passed directly to JFK. Mary Hannon hailed from County Limerick stock, Irish Catholic, immigrant descended, and working class. She married John F. Fitzgerald and raised her children within the vibrant heart of Boston's Irish Catholic community. In a world where the church was the hub of social life and political ambition offered the only path upward, Mary was not famous. History did not record her opinions or preserve her words. Yet, she carried something history could not ignore: an unbroken maternal line and a daughter named Rose. Rose absorbed everything: the discipline, the faith, and a permanent, sharp awareness of where her family had come from and how far they still needed to go. Educated partly in Europe, speaking multiple languages, she navigated the world with a composure that belied the vast distance she had traveled from her grandparents' tenements. When she married Joseph Kennedy, She was marrying into the same Irish Catholic immigrant world, albeit one generation further along in its ascent. The women in this lineage were not powerful in the conventional sense. They didn't hold office, run businesses, or appear in newspapers, but they were the unbroken biological thread through which a mitochondrial haplogroup and everything that haplogroup had survived passed from one generation to the next. Without Mary Hannon, there is no Rose. Without Rose, there is no JFK. The line is the story, and the line was theirs. However, the maternal line alone cannot fully explain what transpired. To understand that, you must meet the man who masterfully transformed immigrant loyalty into a formidable political machine. John F. Fitzgerald, better known as Honey Fitz, picture Boston in 1900. The North End neighborhood teemed with Irish Catholic families, the children and grandchildren of famine, immigrants living in crowded tenement buildings, working the docks, construction sites, and domestic service jobs that the Anglo-Protestant establishment relegated to them. The city's social hierarchy was as rigid as a caste system. Irish Catholics at the bottom, Yankee Protestants at the top, and no one in living memory had managed to cross that divide. Into this world stepped John F. Fitzgerald, born in the North End in 1863 to Irish immigrant parents. Educated at Boston Latin School, he briefly enrolled in Harvard Medical School before pivoting to his true calling, politics. They called him Honey Fitz for his charming demeanor and his famous singing voice. He would often burst into Sweet Adeline at public events, captivating the crowd. Honey Fitz grasped a truth the Yankee establishment had underestimated: numbers. The Irish Catholic community in Boston had grown large and organized enough, primarily through the parish structure of the Catholic Church, to constitute a genuine electoral force. The establishment could discriminate against them economically, even exclude them socially, but it could not invalidate their votes. Honey Fitz meticulously built a political operation that converted neighborhood loyalty into ballot box power. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives and was elected mayor of Boston twice. Theatrical, tireless, and utterly ruthless in expanding his community's political footprint, he was also Rose Kennedy's father, the man who bequeathed his daughter a world that, for the first time, held real possibility. Rose, in turn, married Joseph P. Kennedy, the son of Patrick Joseph P. J. Kennedy, who had likewise forged his own political and business empire from the same Irish Catholic Immigrant Foundation. Joseph Kennedy Sr. became one of America's wealthiest men, navigating banking, real estate, and investment with the same keen instinct for power that Honey Fitz applied to ward politics. He leveraged that wealth into social legitimacy, and that legitimacy into a platform for his children. The strategy worked, producing something nobody, not even Joseph Kennedy, had fully envisioned: a president. And the immense cost that accompanied that presidency is also part of this story. The year 1960 presented an almost impossible challenge. When John Fitzgerald Kennedy ran for President of the United States, a significant portion of the country genuinely, openly believed that a Catholic could not and should not be elected. Many feared that if a Catholic occupied the White House, the Pope in Rome would effectively dictate American foreign policy. Protestant ministers preached this from their pulpits. Political analysts wrote about it in major newspapers, and voters in multiple states voiced it as a direct objection to his candidacy. This was not a fringe sentiment. It was mainstream. The Protestant Anglo-American establishment that had excluded Irish Catholics from Boston's social elite in the 1840s had not simply vanished in a century. It had evolved, becoming subtler, but it still drew a distinct line, and John Kennedy stood directly on that line. He won anyway. In November 1960, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the great-grandson of famine immigrants, the grandson of Honey Fitz, the son of Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, née Hannon, with her unbroken Irish mitochondrial line, was elected the 35th President of the United States. He was the first Catholic ever to hold that office and the youngest man ever elected to it. In June 1963, just 5 months before his assassination on November 22nd of that year, he visited Ireland. At 46 years old, he stood in the country his maternal ancestors had fled in desperation and was received with a popular emotion that even veteran political observers struggled to describe. The crowd wasn't merely responding to a president. They were witnessing a living proof of concept, a vivid demonstration of what one ordinary, unremarkable haplogroup H maternal line could achieve in a single century. Yet, there is a heartbreaking dimension to this story. 2 of JFK's brothers were assassinated. His son died in a plane crash. His daughter died in infancy. JFK himself was tragically shot in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, at the age of 46. The Kennedy story is no fairy tale. It is ambition and grief in almost equal measure. And none of that, not the grief, not the triumph, not the presidency, not the tragedy, is contained within the DNA. The DNA is simply haplogroup H, common, unchanged, the same code carried by millions of anonymous Irish descendants across the world. So, what then made this line different? That is the core question, and its answer makes this story genuinely, historically bizarre. People often approach stories like this expecting a specific kind of revelation. Hidden royal ancestry, a rare genetic variant that explains everything, the confirmation that powerful families were always destined for greatness, the idea that greatness is biological, that destiny is somehow written in the haplogroup, is immensely comforting. Viral claims often circulate about famous people and their DNA, royal bloodlines secretly confirmed by mitochondrial science, presidents discovered to have descended from ancient European nobility. The internet loves these narratives because they make power seem logical, preordained, and inevitable. But here's what no one tells you. There is no reputable geneticist, no peer-reviewed publication, no credible scientific finding anywhere in the public record that shows anything unusual in JFK's maternal DNA. No rare variant, no hidden ancestry, no exotic origin. The haplogroup is H, one of the most common in Western Europe, carried by tens of millions of people who have never come close to political power. The viral version of this story, which promises bizarre hidden genetics in the Kennedy line, is either a misreading of legitimate genetic science, an exaggeration of minor genealogical findings, or in some cases, a straightforward fabrication. The actual story, the true and fully documented narrative, is far more powerful than any fabricated mystery could ever be. And here's the profound irony, the bizarre truth this story truly highlights. It isn't that the DNA is strange, it's that the DNA is utterly ordinary. That, in itself, is genuinely, historically bizarre. To fully grasp its weight, one must place 2 facts side by side and contemplate the immense distance between them. Let us place 2 stark facts side by side and truly absorb them. Fact 1. The mitochondrial haplogroup running through JFK's maternal line is H, one of the most common haplogroups in the Irish and Western European population. It is unremarkable, widespread, shared by millions who escaped the famine, crossed the Atlantic on coffin ships, settled into Boston's tenements, took the work no one else wanted, and were told, openly and without apology, that they did not belong. Fact 2. That exact haplogroup, in that exact unbroken maternal line, running from County Limerick and County Wexford through Mary Hannon and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, arrived in the Oval Office in January 1961. That is the entire story. And the distance between those two facts, a century, an ocean, 4 generations, and a complete social system designed to prevent precisely this outcome, is the most extraordinary thing the DNA reveals. Not because the DNA is unusual, for it is not, but because this immense distance was traversed by people carrying entirely ordinary genetics through choices that were deliberate, costly, and sometimes devastating. The DNA doesn't explain it. The DNA times cannot times explain it. Haplogroup H does not confer political genius. It does not guarantee ambition. It does not select for the unique combination of charm, strategy, ruthlessness, and historical timing that the Kennedys managed to produce across 4 generations. The genetics are silent on all of that. The genetics merely confirm the lineage, then leave the real question completely open. If the DNA didn't make this happen, what did? What truly built this dynasty? The honest answer lies in community, strategy, timing, grief, and a series of specific, consequential, and sometimes brutal choices made by real people under immense historical pressure across 4 generations. The Irish Catholic community in Boston, by the late 19th century, was large enough to be a potent electoral force. The Catholic Church provided the institutional structure that bound it together. Honey Fitz understood how to convert that structure into votes. P. J. Kennedy understood how to convert votes into business opportunities. Joseph Kennedy Sr. understood how to convert business opportunities into the kind of wealth that buys access to an entirely different world. And Rose, carrying her unaltered mitochondrial line, performed the invisible labor of raising children to reach further than she had, understanding that the ultimate goal was something none of them would live to see completed. Each generation built upon the previous one, absorbing its ambition and its grief, pushing the line a little further from the tenements of the North End, and a little closer to something none of JFK's great-grandparents could have imagined, something none of them, by the standards of the world they were born into, had any right to even attempt. And through it all, the DNA remained unchanged. Haplogroup H, the same quiet code from famine Ireland to the White House. It didn't carry the answer in its genome. It carried the people who would have to find the answer themselves, generation by generation, decision by decision, loss by loss. That is what makes this story bizarre. Not the rarity of the genetics, but the rarity of the outcome, produced entirely by history, by will, and by a community that refused to accept its assigned position, all running through the most ordinary mitochondrial profile you could possibly find. Let's return to that researcher staring at her screen, the results before her, quiet and unremarkable. She wasn't silent because she found something rare. She was silent because she understood the profound meaning of that ordinariness. She knew the history at the other end of that haplogroup. The famine, the coffin ships, the no Irish need apply signs in Boston's windows, the tenements, the discrimination, Honey Fitz singing Sweet Adeline to a crowd of people who had been told they didn't belong. And she juxtaposed all of that against the image she knew the other end of this line had produced. A young man, hand on a Bible, January 20th, 1961, the first Catholic president in American history, the great-grandson of famine emigrants, the grandson of Mary Josephine Hannon, the son of Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, born 1890, Boston, Massachusetts. Haplogroup, common, unremarkable. What DNA uncovered about JFK's maternal line is bizarre not because the genetics are strange, but precisely because they are not. Because the most powerful political dynasty America produced in the 20th century grew from a genetic profile shared by millions of people who never came close to power. Because science, which was supposed to explain the Kennedys, instead proves that the Kennedys cannot be explained by science at all. The explanation is something else entirely, documented and real, but not found in the genome. It lies in the choices made by Irish Catholic women and men across 4 generations of American history. In Mary Hannon, who passed the line forward without recognition or reward. In Honey Fitz, who converted belonging into ballots. In Rose, who carried all of it, the discipline, the grief, the ambition, the faith, and passed it to 9 children in a house in Massachusetts, a long way from County Limerick. It is the story of a family that turned grief into fuel and kept going, even when the cost was almost unbearable.